All right. Hey guys. So we have Tasha here today with us, and both of her kids have food allergies. So it's going to be super exciting to hear a perspective from a mom. So if you can first start off by telling me about your kids and how they were diagnosed, and what it's like to be a mom of kids with severe food allergies.
Yeah, so it all really started with my first child, my daughter. When she was about 4 months old, we noticed that she started to get a lot of rashes, like kind of eczema rashes, and kind of just skin um, things going on. And we weren't really sure what it was. So we took her to the doctor, and they kind of chalked it up to just being like baby acne or eczema, and didn't really tell us to do anything about it. And of course, at the time, I wasn't equipped to really recognize or know what was happening to my baby. Um, Fast forward about 4 years, it really just blew up for her so badly to the point where she was just covered head to toe in eczema. She had completely scratched off her eyebrows. There was bleeding every night in the sheets. We couldn't control the scratching. As a mom, I knew that there was something going on internally with my child. I just wasn't equipped to know what it was. And so we started seeing a lot of doctors, and it was such a frustrating experience because doctors don't really believe in the relationship between food and allergies and skin, which is so crazy to me because the skin is the window to what's happening internally to your body. So clearly, I knew that something was going on with my child internally. I just didn't know what it was. And all of the doctors that we saw kept just trying to cover it up with medication and prescribing us like really scary topical steroid creams, really terrifying like nighttime sedative medications. They just kept trying to cover up the problem instead of really trying to figure out what was going on internally with my daughter. And I just knew in my mommy heart that that just was not the path I wanted to take for my child. Like I knew something was going on internally, and I wanted to get to the root cause of what it was. So we just kept seeing doctor after doctor after doctor. And I kept repeating myself saying that like my daughter has like a food allergy or an intolerance or something is going on, and like someone needs to help me. Well, then I had my son, my second child, who had the very same issues going on, and his was even worse. So, I mean, when he was a baby, it was so awful because we didn't even get to have like the bonding experience with our son that you would normally be able to have, just because all he did was like scratch at his face, and we had to keep like little mittens on his hands and hold his arms down like all day. Otherwise he would just scratch his face so bad that he would just be pouring blood. And it was so frustrating and so awful to just go to so many doctors and just feel like I was not being heard, that like I was telling them that something was going on internally with my children. And I really wanted them to figure out what the root cause was instead of continuing to try to cover it up with scary topical steroid medications and sedative sleeping medication and those types of things. So I actually decided to self-diagnose, and I eliminated the top 8 allergens from my own diet because I was breastfeeding at the time. So I gave up the top 8 allergens. I also sought out more of a naturopathic acupuncturist kind of doctor, who helped me do like a blood test and a stool test. And that's kind of when the food stuff came back, and I kind of started relating some of the food allergies to some of the things that were happening with their skin. So that's in conjunction with that information and me self-diagnosing and pulling all of those things from my diet, my children did start getting a little bit better. But the thing about allergies is it's so inflammatory, not only externally, but also internally. So we were already so inflamed on the outside that we really had to start to battle the inside and the outside at the same time. So I came across a doctor finally that was willing to listen to me. We went to National Jewish Health here in Denver, where we live. It's the #1 food, allergy, and asthma hospital in the country. People come here from all over the world for allergies. So we did what they had just started. They called it their day program. So what they did is just a ton of like skin prick testing, blood testing, food challenges. And that's really when we started to make some progress. And they taught us all about how to do, I don't know if you're familiar with like wet wrapping techniques for eczema and skin, but they really taught us how to battle the internal inflammation as well as the external. And we learned what their allergies were at that point. So we learned that our daughter had allergies at that time to dairy, eggs, and peanuts. And then our son had allergies to dairy, eggs, peanut, tree nut, sesame, and sunflower. So that was really big news for us, right? Because like we had no clue how to eat, and it felt really scary and really overwhelming because we had to change our whole life. We had to change our whole eating style. And that was about 6 years ago. So there wasn't as many food options available then as there are now. Plus at that time, I wasn't as knowledgeable as I am now. So I mean, I remember what it was like starting that journey and being in a grocery store and just being so lost and confused, like a deer in headlights. I had no idea like how to read labels, what I was looking at. I remember a point where I was literally sitting down in the middle of an aisle in a grocery store with a list of what alternative names for allergens were and like my phone for Google, and like I was just Googling all of these ingredients because some of the ingredients on labels like aren't in plain English, right? You're like, what the heck is this? And there's so many alternative names for like, especially milk, like they use, casein, whey, milk, like natural flavoring, like all of these names that can be confusing. And of course, they do have to declare the top 8 allergens on the label, but sometimes it's not always in like plain English. So at that time, it was really tough and confusing. And so I just, in the beginning, I felt so overwhelmed, and it really affected every single part of our life because we didn't eat out anymore, right? My husband and I, it affected our marriage because he thought we should do one thing and I thought we should do another thing. And of course, everybody had an opinion, our friends, our family, like everyone wanted to chime in on like what to do. And it just caused so much, just so many challenges with what to do and how to handle it. And like, we didn't go on dates anymore because we didn't have any babysitters that we could trust that knew how to feed our children, or that we were confident was able to utilize an EpiPen in case of an emergency. Like we didn't even feel comfortable using an EpiPen at that point. And these were all new things that we were, having to navigate and figure out. And it was really, really scary. And it affected every single part of our life. I remember there were days that I would just cry and cry, and I just felt so helpless as a mom, like that I just couldn't even do the simplest tasks for my children. I didn't know how to feed them. I couldn't breastfeed. I couldn't take them out to eat. Like, there were days where I just wished so badly that we could just order a pizza or make macaroni and cheese or just have those simple conveniences in life that people take for granted. And so that's really how our journey started. And that was 6 years ago. And so it affected people don't think about how it affects your life, but it really does affect every single aspect, from like, your mental health, your marriage, your family. Obviously you have to change every single thing that you're eating in your home. You have to sub out everything. You have to really relearn how to eat, relearn how to cook, relearn how to shop. It's like you're on this whole new journey and you feel so alone, and sometimes there's not the resources available to help you. So that's kind of where our journey was and how it all started and how challenging it really was for us.
Yeah, and I definitely love like some of the things that you said, because as a mom, like you go your entire life like not having to worry about those things. Like you had never read a label or anything like that. And so when it comes to it and like your child's diagnosed, you're like, okay, this is crazy. I need to like figure all this out. And like it's even something I take for granted, because like I was diagnosed with celiac when I was 8. And so like that's all I know. But if you like go your entire life like not knowing those things, it's really hard to just jump into it and be like, okay, what am I looking for? Like it's extremely difficult. So thank you for sharing that. That's an amazing story. Are both of your kids anaphylactic? Like, do they like break out in hives and eczema when they now consume those allergens?
They can. It's really tricky because, allergies can react differently every single time.
Right.
So luckily we have only had one anaphylactic scare with our daughter, which was a little recent. She was actually at her grandma's house and she drank a clear, it was like a clear bottle of what looked like juice, and it was clear, so it was a little bit deceiving, but it had whey in it. And her grandma didn't read the label because, usually my kids can have juice, because you would just be so surprised the places that you find milk. It's literally everywhere, right? So you don't expect it to be in like a clear bottle of juice. But my daughter did end up having more than one symptom. Usually more than two symptoms. You do have to administer an EpiPen and call 911. But she did throw up, she did get hives, she did get rash, she did feel very sick. So that was luckily the only experience we've had with anaphylactic shock. I don't think that her grandma was prepared enough, so she did not administer the EpiPen. She did call us, but that situation could have gone very differently for us. Had she had a worse reaction than she did. The reaction she had was terrifying, even for her. Even to this day, she won't drink like clear liquids anymore because that was very scary for her and traumatic for all of us. So just so grateful that that situation didn't go past where it did. But nuts especially are really terrifying to me. So we're just really careful about not having any nuts in the house. And like I said, my daughter is allergic to peanuts, but my son is allergic to peanuts and tree nuts. So we kind of just keep nuts away from both of them. So they don't necessarily have anaphylaxis symptoms, to answer your question. However, we do have an EpiPen and an emergency plan in place in case they do have an anaphylactic reaction, because they do have so many food allergies. And food allergies, you just never know what's going to happen with each exposure, can be different.
Right. And what I think is important about like the fact that they have multiple allergies is that like this is not an uncommon occurrence for like them to have like kids to have 3-4 allergies at the same time, which I think is something that's often overlooked. Like people, like especially in the restaurant industry, when we're eating out, it's like, okay, this person can't have dairy, great, like take off the cheese. But when you're dealing with dairy, nuts, eggs, multiple things, that's when it's really important for you to be able to like read that ingredient label or have more knowledge about what they're actually using in their food, because you're not just looking for like the dairy free label on the menu, you're looking for like specific ingredients.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, kind of diving into the eating out portion of things, I know when you first started, you said you didn't eat out at all, which is kind of like a dichotomy because that's why we haven't really seen much change and movement in the industry, is because you're so scared to eat out that you don't give yourself a voice because you're like, I would just rather cook at home and like feel like I'm safe than, deal with that. So, can you talk about your eating experience when they first got diagnosed and then like kind of how it's transitioned and what you guys do now?
Yeah. So we definitely eat out a lot more now than we used to, now that we know their allergies a little better and we're a little better about having a voice and being brave enough to use our voice. In the beginning, it felt very scary and embarrassing to have to ask so many questions to the waiter about their ingredients and how they cook things. And it's tough because people don't really understand. They can only understand you at the level that they're at. So if they're not someone that suffers with food allergies, they don't understand why you're asking those questions, or they even get frustrated or annoyed because they think it's like a fad or a trend, or they don't understand that it's actually like an autoimmune disease that can actually like kill people and is life threatening. So eating out can be extremely challenging. We've definitely found the safe places that I think that we just eat out the most. And we kind of just stick to those places that we know are safe, because we still 6 years later are really scared to go out and try new places, because even when you ask, like, you still can't be sure what's happening in the kitchen. Like, for instance, Asian restaurants, I love Chinese food and Asian food, but like it's just not a place I can go with my children because they use so much like sesame oil and nuts and everything. And it's just not something I'm willing to try. And eating out is definitely just such a challenge because just navigating the menu is so hard, and you never know when something's going to be cross contaminated. And you really have to just build the confidence to use your voice and be brave enough to ask those questions and just be honest and be like, you know what, I have children who have severe food allergies and I really need to know like what is in this food, or can you help me navigate your menu, or what do you have that is safe. It's just, it's exhausting. It's a lot of asking questions, and it's a lot of being prepared too. I find myself like looking up menus before we go somewhere, and like trying to look at their allergy menu to kind of see what my children might be able to have when we get there. So it's just, living with food allergies is always like feeling like always anxious, or always having to be prepared beforehand, or bring your own food, or bring your own sides, or bring your own butter, or like you just always have to live prepared. And it's really tough, especially even when you eat at family's house, like they don't understand or comprehend. So you always have to like make your own food, bring your own food, bring your own butter, bring your own dressing. So it gets to be like really exhausting. And restaurants is the same thing. Like you find yourself, I tell my husband all the time that I should just put together my own kit of like butter and salad dressing and like just bring it to the restaurant so that I know that my kids can at least have safe options if I can order things just totally plain and then add their own items, because it is extremely scary eating out, especially because there's not tools to help you navigate a menu at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then can you talk about like the takeout process? Because obviously, like right now, we're in a pandemic, like you have to order takeout, which I personally find to be like even more difficult because you don't always have a place to put it in the notes. And so you have to like call and go back. So, how does that work with you and your kids?
As far as takeout goes, I think that we're just really too scared to do it. And if we're going to
Yeah.
order takeout, we're just going to order from somewhere that we know is safe. Places that we know for sure are safe are like Chipotle, Chick-fil-A. And we honestly, like, I'm so Chipotle'd out and Chick-fil-A'd out in my life because those are really like just the safest places that we know to go. So like places are really busy and overwhelmed right now with everybody ordering takeout and online. And, you know, when you call a restaurant, sometimes they don't even answer the phone, or, you know, again, it's just having to look at the menu beforehand and like find that allergy menu and like figure out what the ingredients are in the food and like go through a whole process. So it would be so much nicer and so much easier if there was a better, easier way to have information to try new places, because it's just for us, we don't really order out because it's just too scary, because there's not resources to teach us about new restaurants to eat at or new places to go. But it can be so exhausting, right? Because I'm having to cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day. And it gets to be really tedious and tiring and exhausting. And like, you know, I just feel so like I miss the days that I could just run around and take life for granted. You know what I mean? Like living with allergies is so much differently, and people really just don't understand how easy they have it when they can just order a pizza or order takeout or live their life, because, you know, people just don't understand how challenging and scary it can be to have to worry about every single bite you take, and if that is going to send your child to the hospital, or if they're going to have some sort of allergic reaction, or worst case scenario, if they're going to die, because that happens to children every single day. People are dying from their food allergies every single day because there's not enough resources to be safe.
Right. Like there's 1 in 3 people that go to the hospital because of food allergies. And what's fascinating is like the average American eats out 5.9 times a week because like we're lazy. But people with food allergies, like I could never eat out 6 times in a week. Like that would be extremely stressful. So it's just so interesting that like dichotomy and difference between like what the normal American population is doing and like what we have to do in order to stay safe.
Right.
Um, yeah. So and then can you tell me like why Chick-fil-A, why Chipotle, like what about them made it so you feel safer taking your kids there?
I think that for one, like Chipotle is really awesome because if you tell them that you're dealing with a food allergy, they will change their gloves for you, and they will also bring out like fresh batches of food like guacamole and stuff. So we've just found them to be like the most friendly and accommodating as far as the food allergies go. And we kind of just know that our kids are going to be safe there because we've eaten there several times, and they're always so kind and accommodating with like changing their gloves and bringing out fresh food and being very understanding and aware of the food allergies. And same with Chick-fil-A. It's always their pleasure, right? Like they're always willing to go above and beyond to make sure that your children are safe or your family are safe. So we've found that like the grilled chicken nuggets and the French fries are safe for our family, and we've eaten there with no problem. So that's really why. It's because we've just done it repeatedly and we've been safe every time. And we've found that those places tend to be more kind and friendly and accommodating is the thing. Like when you go somewhere and someone gets like frustrated or annoyed at you or doesn't want to answer your questions, it can be like, well, I don't want to eat your food because you clearly don't care and you're not going to care about making sure that I'm safe. But when you go somewhere where people are really like, okay, I get it. Let me change my gloves for you. Let me bring out fresh food for you. Let me like make sure that we're safe. It makes you feel a lot more comfortable when people can be a little more kind.
Right, absolutely. And like when you get that pushback, it also makes you feel a lot more nervous because you're like, oh, maybe they don't understand. Should I be nervous? Should I be asking more questions? So that's definitely something that runs through your head. And I also think it helps with Chipotle and Chick-fil-A because I agree they're great places for food allergies. There's like a lot of standardization in place that doesn't exist with more local restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so kind of going to like the resource that we're trying to create with Macro Menu. Obviously, like a lot of things that we touched on is a problem that we see as like a massive one. So with like having accessibility to seeing ingredients in advance, having more information about what the restaurant does in order to avoid cross contact, and just being able to like have some of those questions answered in advance, along with like your allergies very specifically being printed on the ticket with your order. How would like processes and standardization around that make you feel in terms of eating out, and like how would that change your experience?
Oh my God, I think it would just be so amazing. Like, I literally think it would be so amazing to have more restaurants be just on board with like an awareness and a clearness of what is going on in their restaurant, like what they're doing to help prevent cross contamination, what ingredients they're using in their food. It would just make life so much simpler to have an easier way to just like look up a restaurant and be like, okay, great, this dish has this and this in it, and this is what they're doing to help with cross contamination, and this is safe. And right now there's not anything out there like that. So that would just make life so much easier, and it would be amazing to bring my children to experience more places and more foods and introduce more foods into their diet, because what really happens is they get so used to eating the same things, right, that they're not open to trying other items, or they're too scared. So like I feel like they're living in this tiny little box of their favorite foods when there's such a huge world of amazing foods and flavors out there that they're missing out on. And so I think it would just be so amazing to have a resource where we could know that we could go somewhere new and my kids could try something that they might love, and it would be safe, and it would be like so awesome. I can't even express to you how amazing that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think is really important about that is like there are so many restaurants that like, for example, like don't use nuts in any of their dishes, but it's obviously like not advertised, and like it's nowhere to be found on their website, and like nobody knows about it. So then like people who are, for example, like anaphylactic to nuts are like, well, I'm just not going out because I don't want to get sick. But it's like this restaurant like doesn't even have nuts in the entire facility. And so it's like bringing that information to the surface, you could be like, oh, okay, cool. Like there's nuts nowhere. Great. Like, let me go there. So it's just an interesting thing because it's like not being advertised to people with food allergies. And so like having just even like information on like where you can go, like you said, would make a big difference.
It would be so nice, because honestly, like I love Chipotle and Chick-fil-A, don't get me wrong, but like it would be really nice to eat something different once in a
Yeah.
while.
Right. And it's like all about culture as well. Like I'm a big traveler, and I'm sure like as you know, like trying foods from like all over the world like build character, and they allow you to like expand your horizons on like a cultural perspective as well.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point. That's another thing, is that we tend to not take family vacations. Like we had an opportunity to go to Hawaii a few years ago, and we didn't do it because a lot of it was just like tourist entire days that included food, and it was just too scary to just have that one option for lunch and like not know if it was safe. So like vacationing doesn't really exist for us either. So having a resource like that where we could go anywhere and be in an unfamiliar place and have access to restaurants that we're not familiar with and have the knowledge to know what we can eat there easily, and quickly would be life changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just important to like give people like you and like others that have a similar story like a voice, because we've been so scared and like pushed back into our houses that like nobody's really like speaking up about it. And you're just like, okay, well, I'll just do my own thing and make sure I'm safe. But it's like the difference and the dichotomy, like I said, is so different. Like I really am on a mission to like bring this story to the surface, because like as you probably know, there are so many others that are experiencing very similar things.
So true. Food allergies are just becoming like a worldwide epidemic. It's
Yeah.
crazy to me how many people are suffering from food allergies or food intolerance and actually don't even know it because the inflammation is so different for every person. Like if someone is suffering with, you know, acne or headaches or irritable bowel or fogginess or ADHD, like all of these crazy things are being wrongly diagnosed and wrongly treated when really it could just be that you have a food allergy or a food intolerance that could solve this illness for you. Like I've literally seen people pull their triggers and their allergens from their diet and cure entire diseases. Food really is the computer running the show. It's telling your body exactly what to do. And so when you're putting the wrong things in your body that your body is literally fighting, like a food allergy is literally your body fighting off its own self. And so when you're constantly feeding yourself the wrong things without knowing, and all of these inflammatory things are happening, it's just really scary and sad how many people are walking around probably not even knowing. And it's also enlightening that I love that there is starting to be more of an awareness around it, and people are starting to really dig deeper into their health and food allergies, and there are more foods that are accessible today than there were 6 years ago when I started. And there are more people like you trying to help the community of the food allergy people. And like, it's taken a really long time, but it is definitely time for these things to start happening for people, because it is definitely needed and it is definitely not utilized enough. So this is definitely something that needs to start happening way more frequently. So I'm so excited that you guys are doing this, and I literally can't wait to start utilizing it when it's ready. And I just think that it's going to be really life altering for a lot of people, especially someone like me, someone who's seasoned and who's lived the life for 6 years. And, I'm knowledgeable, but not knowledgeable enough to be brave enough to still eat out at restaurants, because it still is extremely scary no matter how many years you're suffering with it, no matter how knowledgeable you think you are. It only takes one bite to change your life, really. So it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one little mistake and you might be in the hospital, you might be dead. And that's kind of the sad reality of it, even though it's really harsh. And I think because, like you said, everybody reacts differently and everybody has so many different sensitivities. Like I'm a nutrition and health coach. So this is what I do. I help clients figure out their food triggers, right? Help them figure out whether they have an intolerance or an allergy. Because you could go to 10 doctors and they're giving you pills and things that are covering up symptoms, but not actually solving them at the root cause. So that looks different for everybody. So when restaurants kind of see somebody with a gluten allergy and they're like, well, I can have some, but if I have it paired with this food, then I'm sensitive. And then you have other people that have celiac where they're like, I can't have anything. It's just everybody's body reacts differently. And so I feel restaurants who don't understand allergies or don't have people with allergies, they'll look at that and be like, okay, now I'm confused because this person over here says this and this person over here says this. And the sad reality is it's just never going to be the same. And so that's why it's important for there to be better communication between the restaurant and the consumer. So it's okay, here's my allergy, but also here's my level of severity, so that there can be clear understanding about what exactly that restaurant needs to do for that specific symptom.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's not even that restaurants don't necessarily not care. I think it's just a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding. So I think it would just be so great for the world across the board just to come to more of an awareness of what is really happening in the world of food allergies and food intolerance. And the saddest thing for me is that when you go to a traditional doctor, doctors just don't believe in the relationship between food and sickness. And it is the craziest thing to me. It boggles my mind literally, because when somebody is actually sick, like when they're finally sick with like heart disease or diabetes, then they tell you to stop eating red meat, or then they tell you to change your diet. So like, I don't understand what the disconnect is, because change your diet to get healthy or to like fix your sickness, but like don't change your diet to not get sick, doesn't make any sense to me. So it is so frustrating to me that still today, with as many people suffering from food allergies and food intolerance, that the disconnect is still there with doctors is so frustrating, which is why I think more and more people are going to people like nutritional coaches or dietitians or more natural types of doctors, acupuncturists, wellness people, because medical doctors they're just not there. And I just don't get the disconnect. Like, it should be eat so you don't get sick, not eat so that you can get better from being sick. Like, the mentality behind it, it just boggles my mind, and it's so frustrating.
Right. And like that should be explored, like you said, before you start prescribing medication, because like I mean, from my like expertise as a coach, like medication makes it worse. And sometimes medication actually contains the physical allergen that you can't have. Like I talked to a client the other day that was like, I was prescribed a medication that had gluten in it. I found out 2 months later that I had celiac. So like that is definitely crazy to me.
Yeah.
But
And like, for instance, we can't have the flu shot because the flu shot has egg in it. And a lot of people don't know that, right? And like, when you go to the doctor and you say, hey, I have these food allergies, it's like they don't even care. They just want you to vaccinate. And I'm not saying I'm against vaccinations or anything like that. I'm just saying that there has to be some sort of awareness of every single thing that you're putting in your body, because allergens are everywhere. They're not only in food, they're in vaccines, they're in medication, they're in shampoo, soap, like, everything you can think of. So when people think of allergies and they're only relating it to food, even that is sometimes backwards, because allergens really live everywhere. Allergens have no address. They're in everything.
yeah, absolutely. Which is like why that awareness is important. And I loved how you said it's not that the restaurants don't care, because they do care. Like I've talked to 100+ of them now, and they like truly like want to help so badly. And they're like, we'll do whatever they need in order to keep them safe. It's just that lack of like communication. So it's like breaking that barrier so that everybody like understands and is more knowledgeable about like where we're headed and like what the direction of allergies is.
Exactly. And that's my biggest advice that I give, even when people like are struggling communicating, not only at restaurants, but like with family. It's not that people don't care, and it's not that they don't want to accommodate you or help you. It's really just like a lack of knowledge. So you really just have to like help them learn, help them understand, and even give them more resources to like learn and research and like kind of get on your level, which is again why something like what you're doing is going to be so great, because then everybody will have access to just having more knowledge. That's really what it's about, is just education and more knowledge and more accessibility to the knowledge to the general public, to everyone.
Right, because like the waiter could see the ingredients just as you could see the ingredients, right? So it's even like avoiding the waiter from going back and asking the chef, because like it's only in the chef's brain, right? Like everybody can now use it as a resource to like be more educated about like how to help you.
Yeah, exactly. And at restaurants, it can be really tricky too, because like, for instance, we ran into going to like Mexican restaurants and ordering simple things like guacamole, right? And you would think guacamole would only be avocado, but like some restaurants add in sour cream or even mayonnaise, which contains eggs to make their guacamole more creamy. So it's just like you can never assume anything, even about like the simplest of items. You know what I mean? So like you really have to look at the menu, ask the questions, be brave enough to ask the hard questions, and be okay with asking the questions to keep yourself protected, or be prepared before you go in, because literally you cannot overlook even the simplest things such as guacamole in a restaurant, because they put so many different things in it every different place you go.
Yeah, absolutely. A really good example is like soybean oil, like pan spray. Like a lot of restaurants, when I like did kitchen walkthroughs, were unaware that like pan spray could possibly contain soybean oil, which is an allergen for a lot of people. So something like little like that, where it's like, oh, of course, like my pan spray doesn't contain soybean oil, but in fact it does, because that's something we often overlook. Like something little like that can like set somebody with a food allergy off. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really, really appreciate it. I loved this conversation. And it was really, really awesome to hear your story and hear more about your kids.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was an
Yeah,
honor. So
of
glad
course.
to just create awareness any way I can.
Yeah, absolutely.